I should have known something was off the day I found Mrs. Carter waiting on my front porch. Mrs. Carter, retired, nosy, always looking out for her neighbors, rarely ventured beyond her azaleas unless it was serious. And there she was, clutching her cardigan, her expression somewhere between nervous and apologetic. "Ethan," she started, glancing over her shoulder like she was worried someone might overhear. "I saw your wife earlier. She had company while you were at work." Her words hit me like an ice-cold wave, but I managed to force a chuckle. "You sure about that, Mrs. Carter? Maybe it was one of her friends dropping by." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and I could tell she didn't want to say more. "I just thought you'd want to know." With that, she shuffled back down the porch steps, leaving me with the kind of silence that buzzes in your ears. I shrugged it off, or tried to. My wife, Lily, and I had been married for 8 years. Sure, the spark wasn't what it used to be, but that's marriage, right? You get comfortable, you settle into routines. Lily had her quirks. She could be sharp-tongued and manipulative when she wanted to be, but I always chalked it up to her passionate personality. Still, something about Mrs. Carter's tone gnawed at me. That evening, while Lily was at her yoga class, I sat on the couch scrolling through the home security app on my phone. We'd installed cameras last year after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I hadn't checked the footage in weeks, but now, curiosity, or maybe paranoia, got the better of me. It didn't take long to find it. Around 1 p.m., while I was slogging through spreadsheets at work, Lily appeared on the screen. She was dressed casually, jeans, a cropped sweater, but there was a nervous energy about her as she glanced down the driveway. Moments later, a man stepped into view. Tall, blonde, and all too comfortable, he walked right up to her like he owned the place. Lily didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around him, pulling him close. He kissed her. Not a peck on the cheek, not a friendly hug, a kiss, and then she led him inside. I paused the footage, staring at the screen as my stomach twisted into knots. My hands shook as I rewound it, playing the moment again and again, hoping I'd somehow misinterpreted it. But there was no denying what I'd seen. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Who the hell was he? How long had this been going on? And why? What had I done, or not done, that made her think she could betray me like this? When Lily came home later that night, she was her usual self, smiling, chatty, asking about my day. I could barely look at her. "Is something wrong?" she asked, tilting her head in that way she always did when she wanted to seem innocent. I shook my head. "Just tired," I muttered. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more information. And so, the next chapter of this nightmare began. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that footage on repeat. Lily welcoming another man into our home, the same house where we'd celebrated anniversaries, fought over paint colors, and talked about starting a family someday. Now, it felt like a lie. A pretty shell cracked wide open. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Lily left early for her office job, as she always did, but I wasn't buying her regular routine anymore. After her car disappeared down the street, I pulled up the security app again, this time with grim determination. The footage told a story that made my blood boil. It wasn't just a one-off. The blonde man, who I now nicknamed the asshole in my head, had been coming by for weeks. Different days, different times, always when I was at work. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. Once, they didn't leave the house for 3 whole hours. I went through the rest of the footage with a sick kind of fascination, cataloging every detail. Her body language was telling. The way she'd check the driveway nervously before he arrived, how she'd smile at him like he was the center of her world, how close they'd stand as they spoke. And then there was the bedroom. Yeah, I saw them disappear into our bedroom. Twice. I didn't watch long enough to torture myself with details, but I saw enough to know what was happening behind that closed door. My hands gripped the phone so tightly I thought I might crack the screen. By noon, I had pieced together a timeline, but I still didn't know who he was. That changed when I ran into my coworker Mike at the coffee shop. Mike's one of those people who knows everyone, always up on the latest office gossip. As we chatted about nothing, I casually described the asshole. Tall, blonde, good-looking in a douchey way. Mike's eyes lit up. Oh, that sounds like Dylan from HR. He's been working with us for, what, a year now? Why? My stomach sank. Dylan. It all made sense now. The way Dylan had gone out of his way to befriend me over the past few months, offering to cover shifts and chatting me up in the break room. I thought he was just a nice guy. Turns out, he was just trying to get close enough to stab me in the back. I played it cool with Mike, pretending it wasn't a big deal, but inside, I was seething. Not only was my wife cheating on me, but she was cheating with someone I knew, someone I worked with. By the time I got home, I was shaking with rage. I wanted to confront her then and there, but I knew I needed to stay calm. If I went in guns blazing, she'd deny everything, twist the truth, and somehow make me the bad guy. No, I needed to catch her in her lies, make her squirm. That evening, Lily came home like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek, asked how my day was, and started talking about some coworker drama. I stared at her, wondering how she could act so normal after everything she'd done. "How's Dylan?" I asked casually, keeping my tone light. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a split second, I saw it. The flicker of panic in her eyes, the calculation as she decided how to respond. "Dylan?" she said, her voice too innocent. "I don't really know him that well." "Why?" I smiled, even as my insides burned. "Oh, no reason. I just heard he's a nice guy." She relaxed, laughing lightly. "Yeah, I guess so. I don't really talk to him much, though." Lies. Lies wrapped in a pretty package. I didn't press further. Instead, I excused myself and went to the garage, where I could pace and fume without her noticing. My mind was spinning with possibilities. How could I make her admit the truth? How could I expose her for what she really was? That night, as she lay sleeping beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying her words in my head. "I don't really know him that well." Bullshit. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, but I was getting close. I couldn't wait any longer. By the next morning, my plan was set. I'd get Lily to admit to the affair without her realizing I already knew everything. I'd let her lies pile up like a house of cards, and then knock it all down in one crushing blow. She came home from work that evening, humming as she set her purse on the counter. It made my skin crawl. How she could act so carefree when she was tearing my life apart. "Hey babe," she said. "What do you want for dinner?" I forced a smile. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something first." Her brows furrowed slightly, but she nodded. "Sure, what's up?" I gestured toward the couch, and we sat down. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral. "I got a weird call today," I began, keeping my tone casual. "From Dylan." Her face froze, just for a second, before she forced a laugh. "Dylan? Why would he call you?" "I was wondering the same thing," I said, leaning forward slightly. "He mentioned something about you. Said you've been meeting up outside of work." Her smile faltered. "That's ridiculous. I barely know him." "Lies." I tilted my head, studying her. "Are you sure?" He seemed pretty confident. She waved a hand dismissively. "He must have misunderstood or something. Maybe he saw me at a work event and assumed." I cut her off. "Lily, stop. I know you've been seeing him." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. But then she straightened her shoulders, crossing her arms defensively. "What are you talking about? I haven't been seeing anyone." I reached for my phone, pulling up the security footage. "This is from last Tuesday," I said, holding the screen where she could see it. The video showed Dylan walking up to the house, his arms around her. Her face went pale. "And this," I continued, swiping to the next clip, "is from 2 weeks ago. You didn't even bother locking the bedroom door that time." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You've been lying to me for weeks, Lily," I said, my voice cold. "How long has this been going on?" She stammered, searching for an excuse. "It's not what it looks like. I let him in because he needed help. He was having a rough day and I—" "Stop." My voice cut through her rambling, and she flinched. "Do you really expect me to believe that? You've been sneaking around, lying to my face, and now you want me to think you're some kind of good Samaritan?" Her expression hardened, a flash of anger replacing the panic. "Well, Maybe if you'd been paying more attention to me, I wouldn't have needed someone else. There it was. The blame shift. I stared at her, feeling a strange mix of rage and disgust. So it's my fault you decided to sleep with someone else? She crossed her arms again, defiance radiating off her. You're not exactly perfect, Ethan. You're always at work, always distracted. When's the last time you even noticed me? I noticed, I said, my voice low and trembling with anger. I noticed you laughing at me behind my back. I noticed you letting another man into our home, into our bed. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't deny it this time. Fine, she snapped. Yes, I slept with him. Are you happy now? You want the truth? There it is. Happy? I was anything but. I stood, pacing the room as I tried to keep my emotions in check. How long? I asked. What does it matter? She shot back. It matters to me, I said sharply. How long? 3 months, she muttered, avoiding my gaze. 3 months. A quarter of a year. She'd been lying to me, betraying me. For 3 damn months. I stopped pacing and turned to face her. You think this is just going to blow over, Lily? That you can throw some blame at me and we'll move past it? Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty there. I don't know, she said, her voice quieter now. What do you want me to say, Ethan? I screwed up, but we can work through this. Couples do it all the time. I laughed bitterly. Work through it? You didn't just cheat, Lily. You lied. Over and over. You mocked me to Dylan. You humiliated me. There's no coming back from that. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the words I wasn't ready to say. Finally, she stood, grabbing her purse. Fine. If that's how you feel, maybe I'll stay with my sister for a while. Do what you want, I said coldly. Just don't expect me to forgive you. She left without another word, the door slamming behind her. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the empty space she'd left behind. Then, slowly, I sank onto the couch, the weight of it all crashing down on me. The silence after Lily left was suffocating. It wasn't the peaceful quiet you get after a long day. It was the kind that presses against your chest, refusing to let you breathe. I sat on the couch, staring at the door like it might swing open and give me back my old life. But it didn't. Instead, I was left with the mess Lily had made. The first thing I did was grab a beer. It wasn't even 5 yet, but who cared? I needed something to numb the chaos swirling in my head. 3 months. She'd been sleeping with Dylan for 3 months, and I hadn't seen it. Or maybe I had, but I'd ignored the signs. Looking back, the signs had been there. She'd started working later, claiming she had team projects or client meetings. There was the sudden interest in her appearance, new outfits, extra time in front of the mirror. I'd even caught her smiling at her phone more than once, brushing it off when I asked who she was texting. Just work stuff, she'd said. Lies. Every word out of her mouth was a goddamn lie. As I sat there, replaying every suspicious moment, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. For a second, I thought it might be Lily, but when I picked it up, I saw a message from Olivia. Olivia, hey, you okay? Saw Lily leaving earlier. Olivia was our next-door neighbor and probably the only person who hadn't bought into Lily's perfect wife act. She'd always been friendly, even when Lily kept her at arm's length. Me, she's staying at her sister's. Found out she's been cheating. Her reply came fast. Olivia, I'm so sorry, Ethan. You don't deserve that. Let me know if you need anything, okay? I appreciated her words, but I wasn't ready to talk. I needed to think. Or maybe I needed to do the opposite. Stop thinking and just act. I opened my laptop and started digging into Dylan. His social media was a goldmine of arrogance. Pictures of himself at happy hours, gym selfies, and a handful of posts that made me want to throw my laptop out the window. One was a photo from 2 months ago, a group selfie at a bar. Dylan was front and center, with his arms slung around Lily's shoulders. The caption read, "Best night with the crew." The crew. I took a screenshot, saving it alongside the security footage. Evidence. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I'd need it. Then there was Lily's phone bill. I hadn't checked it in months, but I logged into the account now, scrolling through the calls and texts. Dylan's number popped up over and over, sometimes at 3 a.m., sometimes for hours at a time. More evidence. More fuel for the fire. By the time I shut the laptop, it was nearly midnight, and I was wired on anger and adrenaline. I couldn't just sit around waiting for her to waltz back in and spin more lies. I needed to take control of the situation. I called my lawyer the next morning. Helen Wilkes wasn't just good. She was ruthless. I explained everything, from the affair to the footage, and she didn't waste a second. Gather everything, she said. Texts, emails, photos. Anything that shows she's at fault. This'll make the divorce easier to settle in your favor. What about Dylan? I asked, my voice hard. He works with me. Can I use that? Helen paused, then said, if he violated workplace policies, fraternization, misconduct, he could be in trouble. But focus on the divorce first. We'll deal with him later. Her calm, confident tone was exactly what I needed. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a plan. But the divorce was just the beginning. Lily might have stabbed me in the back, but Dylan? He'd smiled to my face while doing it. He'd acted like a friend, like someone I could trust. And now, he was going to pay for it. The day after Lily left was a blur of anger, bitterness, and endless pacing. Every time I thought I was done being angry, another memory or realization would hit, reigniting the fire in my chest. This was the woman I'd spent nearly a decade with, the one I thought I'd build a future with. And she'd been laughing at me behind my back the whole time. That night, after another restless day, I decided it was time to rip the bandage off. I called Lily. She picked up after the third ring, her voice flat. What do you want, Ethan? I ignored her tone. We need to talk. Come by the house tomorrow. Why? So you can yell at me again? No, I'm done yelling. My voice was calm, almost too calm. We just need to figure out what happens next. There was a long pause before she sighed. Fine, I'll stop by after work. The next day, I spent the morning gathering everything. Photos of the security footage, screenshots of her texts to Dylan, and a list of key moments I couldn't forget. Not because I wanted to argue. No, arguing with Lily would be like punching fog. She'd twist, deflect, and gaslight until I wasn't sure what was real anymore. This wasn't about convincing her of anything. This was about getting closure on my terms. She showed up around 6, dressed like she always did for work, perfectly put together, every detail calculated. But this time, the look in her eyes wasn't as sharp. Thanks for coming, I said as she walked in. Let's just get this over with, she replied, crossing her arms and leaning against the wall. What do you want to talk about? I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. I don't want excuses. I don't want apologies. I just want the truth. Lily rolled her eyes. Ethan, we already went through this. I told you what happened. No, I said firmly. You told me a version of what happened. The one that makes you feel better about yourself. She scoffed, but I didn't let her interrupt. Why? I asked, my voice quieter now. Why did you do it? Her arms dropped slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might give me an honest answer. But then she looked away, shrugging. I don't know. Things weren't great between us, and Dylan was different. Different, I repeated, my stomach twisting. Yeah, different. He made me feel alive again. Okay? Like I wasn't just a boring housewife waiting for her husband to notice her. The words hit hard, but I didn't let her see it. So instead of talking to me, you decided to screw him in our bed? Her eyes flashed with anger. You're not exactly innocent here, Ethan. You were checked out for years. You made me feel like I didn't matter. Don't put this on me, I snapped. If you were unhappy, you should have said something. Instead, you lied. You cheated. You broke every promise you ever made to me. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging between us. Lily looked away, her jaw tight, but she didn't argue. Do you even regret it? I asked, my voice softer now. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and she let out a bitter laugh. I don't know, Ethan. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. What's the point? It's done. The finality of her words was like a punch to the gut. There was no remorse, no real acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just a cold, detached acceptance that she'd burned everything down and didn't care to rebuild it. I nodded slowly, the last pieces of my anger settling into resolve. "You're right," I said. "It's done. And so are we." Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of regret. But it passed quickly, replaced by the same indifference she'd worn since this all began. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll get my stuff this weekend." With that, she turned and walked out the door. As I watched her leave, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't weighed down by questions or doubts. I had my answer, even if it wasn't the one I wanted. Lily had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. After Lily left that evening, the house felt emptier than ever. But this time, the emptiness didn't bother me as much. It was quieter, sure, but it was also mine. No lies, no fake smiles, no wondering what was happening behind my back. She texted me the next day to confirm she'd pick up her things that weekend. I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say. I spent the next few days in a kind of haze, packing her belongings into boxes and separating them into two piles. Things she could take and things I planned to toss. Every item brought a new wave of memories. The dress she wore to our anniversary dinner last year. The coffee mug I bought her during our trip to Denver. The photo album she'd insisted we start but never finished. Each memory felt like a dagger, but I forced myself to keep going. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for me. When Saturday came, I left the boxes in the garage and waited for her to show up. She arrived around noon, pulling into the driveway in her silver sedan. She'd brought her sister, Harper, which surprised me. Harper and I had always gotten along, and seeing her step out of the car with that cautious look in her eyes made my chest tighten. Lily didn't waste time. She walked into the garage, glanced at the boxes, and started loading them into the trunk. Harper hung back for a moment before approaching me. "Hey, Ethan," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm really sorry about all of this. I had no idea." I nodded, unsure what to say. Harper had always seemed genuine, but right now, I couldn't trust anyone connected to Lily. She hesitated, then added, "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." "I know this must be," she trailed off, glancing toward her sister. I didn't reply. What was the point? When the last box was in the car, Lily turned to me. "I guess this is it," she said, her tone flat. "I guess it is," I replied, crossing my arms. She stared at me for a moment, like she was expecting me to say something else. When I didn't, she sighed and climbed into the driver's seat. Harper gave me a small, apologetic smile before following her. As the car backed out of the driveway, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that she was finally gone, sadness for the life we'd lost, or maybe the life I'd thought we had. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. That night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the darkened yard. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I thought about all the times I'd put her first, how I'd rearranged my life to make her happy, how I'd ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe in us. But Lily didn't care about any of that. She cared about herself, about what she wanted in the moment, no matter the cost. And now, she'd paid the price. I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end of the story. There were still legal proceedings to handle, accounts to separate, and memories to sort through. But for the first time, I felt like I had a solid footing. This was my chance to rebuild, to take back the parts of myself I'd given away. As the stars came out, I raised my glass to the sky. "To the future," I murmured, the words carrying more weight than I expected. And with that, I let the night take me, free of the chains that had bound me for far too long. The first few weeks after Lily left were a roller coaster. On the surface, I was functioning, going to work, hitting the gym, even grabbing drinks with friends on the weekends. But inside, it felt like I was carrying a bag of stones everywhere I went. Memories of our life together hit me at the worst times. I'd be sitting at my desk at work, and suddenly I'd think about the way she used to bring me coffee during late nights, her hand brushing mine as she passed me the mug. Or I'd be driving home and remember the long road trips we used to take, laughing and singing along to cheesy pop songs on the radio. It was like my mind was taunting me, reminding me of the best moments just to twist the knife. One night, I was going through the closet to pack up more of her stuff when I found an old photo album shoved behind a pile of sweaters. I almost left it there, but curiosity got the better of me. I sat on the bed and opened it, flipping through pages of photos from our early years together. Our wedding, her smile radiant as she danced in her white dress. A trip to the beach where we built a lopsided sandcastle and laughed until our sides hurt. Holidays with family. Her face lit up as she unwrapped some thoughtful gift I'd spent weeks planning. I stared at one photo for a long time. Lily and me standing by a campfire on a crisp autumn night. My arm was around her waist, her head tilted toward me as we both smiled at the camera. We looked happy. No, we were happy. But now? That photo felt like a cruel joke. I slammed the album shut and shoved it back into the closet, my hands trembling. Those memories weren't mine anymore. They belonged to a version of us that didn't exist. A few days later, Olivia stopped by. She'd been checking in on me ever since the fallout with Lily, bringing over food or just hanging out on the porch with a couple of beers. This time, she showed up with a pie. "Figured you could use some homemade sugar therapy," she said, holding it out with a grin. I chuckled, taking it from her. "You're a lifesaver, Liv. Come on in." We sat in the kitchen, eating pie straight from the tin and talking about everything except Lily. It was a relief, having someone who didn't push me to open up unless I wanted to. But as we finished our second slices, Olivia leaned back in her chair and gave me a look. "You're not okay, are you?" The question caught me off guard. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "I'm getting there. It's just taking time." She nodded, studying me. "You don't have to do this alone, you know. Bottling it up isn't going to help." Her words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her I was fine, that I had everything under control. But the truth was, I didn't. The anger, the sadness, the constant back and forth between wanting to forget Lily existed and missing the person I thought she was. It was eating me alive. "Yeah," I said finally. "I know." She didn't push further, just reached out and squeezed my arm. "Whenever you're ready." That night, I did something I hadn't done since the day Lily walked out. I let myself feel everything. The anger, the grief, the disappointment. I let it wash over me, wave after wave, until there was nothing left but exhaustion. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. After that night of letting everything out, something shifted. The weight in my chest was still there, but it felt lighter, like I could finally breathe again. I wasn't healed, not even close, but for the first time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just standing still. The next morning, I made a list. Clear out the house. Start therapy. Focus on myself. It wasn't much, but it was something. Clearing out the house turned out to be harder than I expected. Every corner held reminders of Lily, her favorite mug in the cabinet, the throw pillows she insisted on buying even though I thought they were pointless, the half-empty bottle of her shampoo in the shower. At first, I couldn't bring myself to throw anything out. It felt too final, like I was erasing the last traces of her. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the smug look on her face when she admitted to the affair. So, I boxed up everything that was hers and donated most of it to charity. The rest went straight into the trash. By the time I finished, the house looked almost unrecognizable, bare, like a blank canvas. It felt strange, but it also felt good, like I was reclaiming the space as my own. The second step on my list was therapy. I wasn't sure about it at first. The idea of spilling my guts to a stranger wasn't exactly appealing. But Olivia had recommended someone, Dr. Carson, and after some convincing, I decided to give it a shot. My first session was awkward. Dr. Carson was calm and professional, but I could barely get through the basics without feeling like an idiot. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you've been through a lot recently. Where do you want to start?" I hesitated, staring at the floor. "I don't know. The beginning, I guess." He nodded. "Take your time." So I told him about Lily, about the affair, the lies, the way she'd made me feel like a stranger in my own life. I talked about the anger, the sadness, the constant back and forth between missing her and hating her. Dr. Carson listened without interrupting, only asking the occasional question to keep me going. By the end of the session, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but in a weird way, it also felt cathartic. The third step, focusing on myself, was the hardest. For years, my life had revolved around Lily. I'd planned vacations around her schedule, rearranged my priorities to make her happy, even put off hobbies I loved because they didn't fit into her version of our life. Now, I didn't have to do any of that. It started small. I went back to the gym, dusted off my old guitar, and even started cooking for myself instead of relying on takeout. At first, it felt hollow, like I was just going through the motions. But gradually, those small steps started to add up. One day, I found myself sitting on the porch, strumming the guitar and watching the sunset. For the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I wasn't thinking about Lily. I wasn't angry or sad or bitter. I was just present. It wasn't a big moment, but it was enough to remind me that I could move on, that I didn't need her, or anyone else, to define my happiness. The weeks turned into months, and little by little, I started to feel like myself again. Dr. Carson helped me work through the lingering guilt and self-doubt, while Olivia kept me grounded with her no-nonsense attitude and occasional sarcastic jokes. Lily was still a ghost in the background, popping up in memories or random thoughts, but she didn't have the same hold on me anymore. I wasn't stuck in the past. I was building a future. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.